Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this GIRI forum addressing the question as to whether the construction industry can take lessons from the medical profession. If I can first introduce myself, my name is Richard Davis. I'm a Performance and Assurance Director with Kier Construction and the newest member of the GIRI board, having just joined a fortnight ago. If I could just take 5 minutes to run through a brief introduction to GIRI for those of you who are not familiar with us. Apologies to our seasoned GIRI members. I will then hand over to Nick Francis, who will lead the session. GIRI started back in 2017 through a collective of experienced individuals who wanted to see change in the industry to improve productivity. The first task that they undertook was to commission a survey into the costs of error in construction. The findings of the survey are on the screen. When unmeasured and indirect costs are included, the situation gets much worse, with estimates of total costs ranging between 10 and 25% of project cost. Or, look at it another way, between 10 and 25 billion per annum across the sector. Now, one can argue that that figure might be higher or lower, but it is of the right order of magnitude. And with a backdrop of an average construction company making 2% margin, an extremely problematic situation to be in. I picked up an interesting stat this week that resonated with me. Some recent Australian research has identified that over 30% of accidents occurred when doing rework. So in my view, error upon error. So hence, GIRI, Strategy for Change proclamation, makes a great deal of sense. Now, that survey produced the root causes that you can see on the screen. And I'm sure everyone that you can identify any of the root causes in terms of the issues that we wrestle with every day. Those root causes can be summarized under the headings of design, culture, poor communication, and skills. So let's take a quick look at how GIRI is going about seeking to achieve its objective of error reduction and the many benefits that such an approach brings. Thought leadership. Focused discussion that can lead to positive outcomes. Joining the dots, what we are here for today. Training. GIRI has developed training courses covering leadership, interface management, and supervisory training targeted on the cultural change needed to avoid error. These courses are CITB accredited, which means they qualify levy payers to receive grants and are available via our website. Campaign. And forums, webinars in the UK and Ireland with audiences in the USA and Australia, international conferences across 5 continents, seminars and workshops. We're also connected to the ICE Learning Hub and the Supply Chain School e-learning. Forums, as many of you know, we've been running a number of workshops and webinars during the COVID lockdown, during which we have covered diverse subjects, including root causes of error, behaviours, culture, carbon and climate change, construction insurance risk, and design and information sources. Knowledge sharing and research. Design features frequently in the list, so we produced a guide to increasing value by avoiding error in design to address this. This guide is available to download from our website. On social media, we are continuing to increasing our activity in this area. Our website is regularly updated. We issue regular newsletters, and we are active on LinkedIn and Twitter. And finally, networking, somewhat hampered by COVID, but hopefully we are reaching the end of the tunnel and we'll be able to plan face-to-face meetings in the near future. The GIRI board met in November last year and collectively felt it was time to update our messaging to bring into focus a broader range of areas where reducing error has a positive impact and where action on culture and behaviours can reduce errors. So alongside the clear productivity gains, saving of time and money, we also recognise the benefits on safety, my earlier reference to the Australian study, and sustainability in that our carbon footprint is reduced if we avoid the waste of resources, both material and physical, by not doing the same job twice. The quality benefit is manifest. Correcting error takes time and money, so if we can avoid it, our outturns in terms of price and completion will be more predictable. Overall, the effect will be a better reputation for individual companies and the industry as a whole. So thank you for joining us today, and I will now hand over to Nick, who will take us through what I expect to be an informative discussion. Thank you, Nick.
Great, thanks very much, Richard. Thank you, and welcome to GIRI. It's great to have you as part of the board. So thanks for giving up your time for that. Well, hello everybody. So we're still trapped in these strange little boxes in front of our computers. So the first thing is, if I can just ask anyone who can, if you can turn your cameras on and just give us a wave, that would be great. It just helps us a bit with human connection, and that's going to be a great way for us to start to get a bit of feedback and recognise a few familiar faces as well. So hopefully we've got a really interesting session lined up this afternoon with Dr. Ollie Hart, who I don't think is on the call right now, which is making me a little bit nervous, but that's okay.
I can't see him either.
Okay, so I'm sure it'll all come good. But what would be good before we kick off? I don't think I need to go through anything in terms of ground rules. I think we've all been turning on microphones and muting ourselves and things like that for long enough. But what would be really interesting is just to find out who we've got on the call. And if I can ask you, please, all just to go to the chat box and just type in 4 things. So your name only needs to be a first name. So your name, who you work for, what you do, and where you are. So for example, I would be Nick, GIRI, engineer, Sheffield. So if you put that in the box, it might give us a little taste of who we've got on the call, because I can see we've got quite a lot of people here. So we've got Severfield, brilliant. Owen Doncaster, just around the corner from me, lovely. Paul, Hostain, Steve, hello, good to see you again. Great, so what I'll do is, whilst that's going on, I am just going to try one more time to give Ollie a quick call, because he is kind of key to this. So I'll let you see who we've got on the call. So I can see we've got a good range of participants on the call today. We've got a mixture of quality managers, but also people from a whole range of different backgrounds in the construction industry. So what I'll do is I will start to give an explanation as to who Ollie is and why we've asked him to come today, in the hope that he arrives any second. And the fallback is I've got his presentation, he's explained it to me, and if he's not here in the next couple of minutes, I'll make a start and he can then come and take over from us. So Ollie is a frontline GP, and I've worked with him before, and what I've always found fascinating is that he deals with very similar problems in medicine that we do within the construction industry, and particularly in GIRI. And he's a frontline GP who's been a partner at a medical practice in Sheffield for the past 18 years, but also is involved in leading innovation in the medical sector through his work with Peak Health Coaching, where they focus not just on the medical prescriptions, but actually creating the conditions in which people can flourish. And back in 2011, he worked with others to found Move More Sheffield, a collection that was about transforming the culture of medicine in Sheffield, making it easier for people to be physically healthy. And he's also one of 2 global health and wellbeing ambassadors for Parkrun. And through Peak Health Coaching, what he now does is helps medical teams to reinvent the way that they deliver healthcare in order to get better results more quickly and for a lower cost. So what we're going to cover in this session is we're going to start by looking at the traditional approach to managing quality and avoiding errors in medicine and how that looks, and see if we can find comparisons between the way healthcare is managed and the way we approach construction. And then we're going to have a look at this thing called person-centered care, which is much more focusing on human behaviours and coaching behaviours, and see if there's anything we can draw from that that is going to be relevant for the way we approach improving quality in construction. So what I will do is, I'm thinking Ollie probably still isn't here at the moment, if that's right, Helena?
I can't see him, I'm afraid, no.
Okay, no, I can't either. So what I'll do is I will, I'll share the slides, and I know the outline of what he's going to talk about. So let me just sort out my display settings, swap slides, there we go, and get those over here. And I will share. Oh, could you just make me a presenter, Helena, and I'll share my screen as well. So we'll just have to adapt and make this work, I'm afraid.
You should have that now.
There we go. Great, thank you. Helena, if you could possibly try giving Ollie a call as well, that'd be great if that's possible.
I will do, yeah.
Great, okay. Thank you. Right, here we go. There. What have I lost here? Sorry, I'm just clicking away at. There we go. Okay, I can see where we are. So, when we think about medicine in a more traditional approach, what we tend to find is that there are two big handfuls of things that go on. So the first thing is that a medical professional will diagnose the problem. So that's deciding what's going wrong. And the second thing that will happen is then the treatment will be applied or prescribed. So in terms of diagnosis, there are a number of steps that can be taken on this. The first one is to gather evidence, so gathering evidence from the patients to find out what's going wrong. Then the people making the judgments, will it be based on their training? You know, they'll have the skills and experience to do that. And also there'll be diagnostic tools. So let's have a look at some of those. So I might start off.
Nick, can I suggest that you turn your video off, because the sound's breaking up. I'm not sure if it's your connection or what, but it's might.
Okay, let me see what I can do. Yeah, let me. Okay, how do I do that?
Should be just a stop video at the bottom.
Yeah. I don't know how to stop sharing my screen at the moment. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. Video. Stop video. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at this idea of the diagnosis, and you're gathering the evidence. So that's the history, getting the patient history and their examination. But then you've got various other ways of trying to get a diagnosis. And this type of approach where you've got flowcharts is probably something we'd all recognise from, you know, it looks very familiar to the way we work in the construction industry. This is just a very rigorous way of making sure that any healthcare professional you go to will do the same thing, and you'll follow through trying to match up the jigsaw puzzle. The next thing you have to do then is, once you've decided what the diagnosis is to actually ensure that it is carried out correctly. So one of the very big areas that you'll be aware of is in terms of the pharmaceuticals. So how do you get from the diagnosis being made to the correct medication being issued to the correct person? And this is where you have all sorts of very rigorous control measures in place. But one of the big problems in medicine is that even if you have a perfect diagnosis system and you then have a perfect pharmaceutical industry that can provide the right pharmaceuticals to the right people, you then end up with things still going wrong at the end of that chain. And this is where stuff falls outside the control of the medical professionals. So that leads to a question about what makes the most important contribution to an individual's long-term health and well-being. And the easy sort of solution to this is we need a better healthcare system. But actually, what has been proven repeatedly is that it's not actually the healthcare system that determines people's health nearly so much as the person themselves. So it is the individual who has far more influence over the outcomes of their own health. And these graphs here, what they are essentially showing is 3 different very significant studies that identify that the healthcare outcomes in different groups are in part due to the healthcare system, so that's what the light purple is, are in part due to the environment that people live in. So these other light purple, the environmental factors or the health patterns of behaviour. But these dark blue parts of the pie charts, what they are indicating is that that is stuff that is completely outside the control of the medical professionals. So whilst we might pump billions of pounds into medical profession, that has no impact at all on these blue parts that are the way that people actually end up behaving. So what I'll do is I'll pause there, if I can figure out the right buttons to press. Stop sharing my screen. I'll stop sharing. Stop sharing. There we go, the very big button. And I will put my camera back on. And what I think would be interesting now is to try to identify anything that is analogous with the construction industry. So the way that the healthcare system approaches preventing error in terms of doing diagnostic, which you might think of as sort of almost like the design, deciding what needs to happen, and then the treatment in terms of implementing the plan. Is there anything at all that you recognise that is analogous with the approach to the way we manage quality and prevent error in construction? So what I'll do, please, is ask you all, we'll have a fastest fingers first competition in the chat box. And just please, if you can think of anything that is analogous between healthcare and construction, and anything you've seen that maybe is a lesson that we could teach them or they could teach us. So we'll see what anyone comes up with. I'll give you, I'll give 1 minute just to type that in. Okay, let's see. We've got a comment here from I think Rupert. The person's behaviour. It's the subby. So maybe I could ask you to expand on that, Rupert.
Well, just like the slide you just showed, we do all this good stuff. We know what's going on. We've got measures to do it, but we can't control what the human being is doing. In construction, whilst we might well be able to control the subby, when it doesn't work and they don't take their medicine, or whatever it might be, we say, oh, we can't help them. Where in fact, I think we can do an awful lot to influence the way our supply chain and the human beings that come.
Interesting. Okay, so but you're recognizing or identifying that there's a tendency to wash our hands of it and say, oh, that's just the subbies. That's not our problem. Whereas actually you're saying that maybe is something we can actually influence. Cool. Okay, thanks. And Lyndon, can I come to you, please? You've said we tackle a problem after it's happened rather than preventing it. Can I ask you to just sort of spell out how you think that compares to medicine? If you're there, Lyndon.
Well, I think it's kind of in the medical profession, we tend to wait for somebody to get sick, then figure out what's wrong with them, then fix them. And we do that in construction. We wait for something to go wrong, figure out how to fix it, then we fix it. And we spend more time doing that than thinking about how to prevent it going wrong in the first place.
Interesting. Okay, so it sounds like there's a real analogy there, and it's something that I always wonder if our healthcare system is more like the AA than it is like having an MOT or servicing your car. It's there and it comes and picks you up when you're broken. Whereas if that was the approach to driving our cars, and we said, well, actually, our approach is that we don't service them, we just call the AA when we break down, we'd quickly realise that's maybe not a good way for our cars to run. But from what you and Rupert have both said, I wonder if it's maybe similar in construction. Maybe Oliver Butcher, you've said primarily focused on treating the symptoms, not the cause. So can I ask you to expand on that and maybe explain how that may or may not relate to construction? Oh, don't know if Oliver Butcher, I don't know if you're there.
Sorry,
okay, we'll move.
Muted in two places. Same point as before, really, that people sort of focus, when things go wrong, we put it right afterwards rather than concentrating on the healthy lifestyle, as it were, beforehand.
Okay, yes, yeah. And so what do you think, do you think there's an analogy there with construction in terms of that idea of healthy lifestyle should be prioritized?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly in terms of the amount of investment. I was just thinking, when you think the amount of money that drugs companies put into coming up with new medicines and things like that, I can't see a similar proportion of investment going on in construction to kind of come up with those solutions.
Okay, so you're questioning where we are putting our money, and is it the appropriate use of that money and effort?
That's
Great,
it, yeah.
thank you. Yeah, and I'll pick up on one here from Steve Williams. You've talked about turning a blind eye to adequate supervision. Can I ask you to expand on that and maybe compare medicine and construction, how you think that applies?
Have a look at DG1, or you have a look at Edinburgh Schools, and you'll realise that if we had adequate supervision, none of those disasters would have happened. I'm being provocative for a reason. But basically, when I started in the industry 30 odd years ago, we had lots of supervision and we had clerks of works, blah, blah, blah. All that's gone. So people end up having lots of snags and having to deal with lots of issues, and a little bit of supervision would have alleviated all of that. And when things go seriously wrong, as they do sometimes, unfortunately, in our industry, you look at the reasons why, and you spend huge amounts of time looking at the reasons why, and then you discover it's basics that have been missed. So we need to go back to basics, and we need to have better supervision on our jobs. There you go.
Okay.
Some people will be scowling at that thought.
Well,
some people will be agreeing with it.
Well, let's hear some of that then. Let's see if anyone who anyone who's not sure that the solution to all our problems is more supervision? Anyone want to?
I'm not
question
saying
or
that. I'm
challenge
saying
that?
that's part of it.
Okay. Okay. So part of it is more and better supervision. Anyone want to vocally agree with that?
I would agree with that.
I
agree
would
with
sort of
that.
almost agree with that, but I think also I've just put in the chat there. I think competence assessment is very highly supervised in the medical profession, and you know there is a high requirement for them to do their repeat training and upgrades and all that sort of thing. And then I think out in the field, if you take paramedics and stuff, they probably aren't supervised that closely, but they do have a governance regime. And if you've unlucky enough to have seen it, when they're getting some drugs out, sometimes they do then ring up and say, I'm about to administer something or other, and somebody says, go ahead, do it. So they do have decision making and competence at the point of action, which we all talk about in the construction industry. But I would say that their governance of that and their CPD sort of competence training is a lot more stringent than in the construction industry. As a view, as a lay person. Yeah.
If I could just perhaps add something to that. I think the Edinburgh Schools is an example of this. We've got lots of other examples where supervision has witnessed errors being made, but failed to correct those errors. And I've looked into various other instances like the Edinburgh Schools where a simple wall tie has not been installed properly throughout a whole building. And the list of people who've witnessed that but failed to stop it or correct it is scarily long. I think in the medical profession, however, there is a different problem, that they use the competency that people carry with them, and I might use a consultant as an example, to make those people untouchable, if you like, and not subject to supervision and not subject to being questioned. And in both industries, we don't have an effective way of collecting or measuring the quantity of mistakes that are being made, nor learning from those. So Edinburgh Schools was one example, but there's loads of examples of that same defect being repeated on many, many other projects because the industry haven't learned from it. And the same is true in the medical profession, where they can have medical disasters repeated over and over and over again over huge amounts of years, over decades, and they've failed to learn from the mistakes. Whereas if you take the airline industry, they've been incredibly effective at learning from mistakes, and they've gone from one of the most dangerous forms of transport to arguably the safest form of transport, purely by being effective at learning from their mistakes. I'll shut up now.
Now that's really interesting there. So, and that sounds like a big alarm bell about this solution of supervision. And you're it sounds like you're pointing out that supervision is useful, but only if the supervisors are doing what we think they're doing, and it can provide a false sense of security, which could possibly be, you know, at best a waste of money, and at worst actually hide error.
That's exactly right, because I'm sure many of us who've looked into defects, whether they be big or small, we can often find paper trails, bits of paper telling us it's fine, evidence saying that such and such a contractor has checked it, signed it, certified it, but it's still wrong. So that's ineffective.
Really interesting. And can I maybe come to Mike Hayward, because you put a comment that sounds a bit similar to that in the chat box, where you said we can have as many procedures and rules as we want, but we have to influence the people to do the right thing. So maybe Mike, can I just ask you to expand on that and see if it's something similar or subtly different to what we just heard?
It probably follows on partly from what some of Rupert said, seems though we're from the same organisation, we've worked together, but I think a lot of what we recognise is we try and tackle the rules, the procedures, the method statements. It's and have all the supposed clever people working out this is the way it's got to be done. If we do it this way, it'll be perfect, and this guarantees the outcome. But unless you can get the the people in the field, the people on the ground, recognising that and understanding what the right thing to do is, and wanting to do the right thing. You know, maybe sometimes something does go wrong, so we go back and rewrite the rules again and revisit the procedures. Because is that the easy thing to do? I don't know. Whereas winning the hearts and minds and getting on people on side with different backgrounds, different levels of understanding, that's in the quite difficult box.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you say there, because it sounds very similar to one of the things we do on our leadership training. I don't know how many of you have participated in the leadership training course, but one of the exercises on that is to review the processes that the company or the project use. And what we do is we brain dump, you know, hundreds of post-it notes for every single process that we have. But then what we do is we'll categorize those based on two axes. So you've got the vertical axis of how comprehensive is the process. You know, if it's the world's biggest spreadsheet, it might be a perfect process, it does everything. But the other axis is how well is it implemented and how well is it followed. And what we find is these amazing patterns with different organizations. When you have a startup company, a small company, they will have a handful of procedures down at the bottom right hand corner. They're not very rigorous procedures, but everyone follows them. And as companies get bigger and older, and particularly when you start having joint ventures and all these mega projects, you drift up to the top left, where your procedures, you get more of them, they get more and more cumbersome. They're brilliant procedures in their own right, but people don't use them. And there's this continual tug of war between complicated, hefty procedures and them actually being used. And something that we recognize time and time again is that every time you employ a quality professional and say, please make our procedures better, what we do is we add more procedures. And actually, what we need is the bravery to say the way we can improve our procedures is to cut out some of them, because then people might actually do them. And it's this real trade-off between human behaviors and process. And I dare say a lot of us on the call are engineers, and we love a good process and we love a spreadsheet and an algorithm. But that's not always the best way to, like you said, Mike, win the hearts and minds. So this real tussle. Okay, well, I think let's move on. Hopefully you're all checking the chat box. I'm sorry I haven't been able to come to everybody. But there's some really interesting comments in there. So please do read those comments, because I'd hate to have not covered some really valuable points. But what I'll do is I'll share my screen again. Here we go. All right, I'm trying to master the technology. And I'll put my video off again so that hopefully it's not cutting out too much. So let's think about high-performing teams. If we've got a high-performing team, or you're a sportsman, or you know, a professional in any field, you'd always have a coach. Can you imagine a sports team where they say, no, we're really, really brilliant, but we don't need a coach. We know what we're doing. Can I just ask, maybe anyone to shout out, has anyone ever had a coach for one of their projects, or a coach for their, you know, their construction company? Has anyone ever come across that? Just shout out if you've ever had anything you'd consider coaching.
We have health and safety coaches.
Okay. Can you expand? What do they do and how does that work?
Well, their role really is about making best practice prevalent and making sure that people around them within their construction site environment understand and implement best practice.
Okay, and is that getting feedback from the participants as well then? So it's not just directing them,
it does certainly get feedback, and it's also just part of a cultural thing whereby you move, in this instance, health and safety up the behavioural agenda.
Okay.
It's interesting you said about culture there, really, because when you look at this slide, for instance, like those football players, Gareth Southgate isn't teaching them any new skills. what he's doing is engendering a culture between them, like a shared culture and that kind of that aim, really.
Interesting.
You know,
go for it. Yeah.
so I was just going to say, like in health and safety, quality is a large part down to culture. That if you've got a project team who are all bought into the culture of quality, you stand a chance. If that is not part of their culture, then you don't stand a chance.
Right. Yeah. Really. And something fascinating there, isn't there? And I was interested by that comment about how Gareth Southgate isn't teaching them new skills. And actually, how often do you go on a training course that doesn't claim to be teaching you a new skill? I mean, is that the only type of course that people will, companies pay for? Companies will pay for a skill to operate a new bit of equipment, or but something that is about culture, that probably sounds like a much harder sell to get someone to pay for the course. I don't know, what's anyone's experience of that in terms of culture and how culture is influenced within companies and projects?
I don't think, apologies for not having my camera on, I'm actually not very well today. I don't think that culture is something that you can necessarily attend a training course on. I think that culture really is small, systematic, continual changes and continual communication and engagement with the workforce. It's not something that you can. Yes, I think from a strategic leadership point, yes, there can be some sort of training and awareness at that level. But I think really when you're working with the guys on the shop floor or the guys on site, that it's got to be that sort of demonstrated behaviors, the primary and recency things. So if they start with a quality moment, they start their team briefings with a safety moment, is do you want to then finish it with a quality moment or a quality care point or something like that? The primacy recency in terms of recalling, if they leave a site briefing on a quality note, is that's going to be what's in their head and that's what they're going to take away then. It's just another thing. But I don't think, culture's not really, you're quite right, I don't think you could sell a course on culture. It's got to be demonstrated behaviors.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's very different to learning a new skill, isn't it? I like that description of it's a drip feed, a constant, something that goes through. And bringing that back to the idea of a coach, you wouldn't go and see a coach once. It's someone you see regularly, repeatedly, who is watching you and giving you feedback. Okay, well, let's have a look at some of the principles, sort of the more, if I can find my share screen button again. I'm showing my inexperience with WebEx. Here we go. So let's have a look at some of the other ideas that are applied when thinking about healthcare. Now, this is a concept that is subtly different to that traditional approach of healthcare that we looked at the beginning, where we were talking about diagnosis and treatment. Medical professional works out what's wrong and then says, this is what needs to be done to fix the problem. So let's have a look at some examples. Sorry, that way. So if you're thinking about the person who needs the medical care or to be healthy, they could be advised. The expert could use experience to suggest what's needed. They could be directed, so you can see it sort of getting a bit more formal. And you could apply medical knowledge and skills. So this is basically external stuff that is telling the person or forcing the person as to what they should do, prescribing the drugs, giving them the diagnosis, instructing them how to live. But actually, if you think of those things, they're all being done to the person, and they're sort of shrinking them down in this analogy. It's squashing them, containing them. So let's look at an alternative view of that. And here we go. So let's wonder if there's a way that you can flip that and try and go from instead of constraining the person and saying, this is what you must do, is there something you can do to give them the opportunity to grow? So maybe understanding what are their fears, what are their hopes, what are their expectations, maybe tailoring the care to their context, understanding what matters to them most, and also maybe rewarding them or valuing them or encouraging them when they do something that's beneficial. So rather than just, you must do this, flipping it slightly and saying, oh, well done when you did that. That was really beneficial. So there's the two concepts then, that idea of stuff that's shrinking them, that's directive, and stuff that's helping them grow when you're encouraging them and listening to what they think, what they need. So just interested, what does anyone think that, do we have analogies for that within the construction sector? The way we try and manage our work on site, which of those two, the shrinking directive or the outward growing, which of those do you think represents how we control our construction projects? Wait for someone to volunteer.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think there are instances or examples where construction projects are allowed, if you like, to achieve a set of targets however they choose to. I think, though, the results are inconsistent, and most construction companies are trying to achieve some level of consistency. And to achieve a level of consistency, they try and achieve a standardization of processes. So that then becomes an imposition of processes on a project, which naturally stifles the project's own aspirations as to how to achieve its goals. But I've been involved in, I mean, I'm going back 20 years ago now, back in the days of Taylor Woodrow, when the board decided to pretty much leave projects to their own, to be managed as they saw fit under what they called a super project manager. Now, some projects did great out of that, but other projects were a disaster. So the company ended up with basically unknown risks and unknown outcomes, and had to start reimposing process and reimposing order and reimposing standardization to rein it back in again.
Really interesting. Okay, so you've got this, on the one hand, flexibility, freedom is a brilliant thing, but there's also this sense that we need standardization, we need consistency, and therefore we need to follow process. Okay, I can see a few people nodding their heads. Paul, I can see you're nodding your head. What's your thoughts on this, this dichotomy between flexibility and freedom versus control and consistency?
Oh, I think I'll agree with my colleague, to be honest. Yeah, it's got to be horses for courses. You've got to put risk management first. There's got to be an acceptable level of risk for certain activities, and others you need to manage them more strongly. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we need to make some profit. We need to increase the bottom line, so we can take the money home to our families effectively.
So that's interesting, isn't it? That link to risk of, the perception that if we have a procedure that mitigates the risk, is that what you're suggesting? If there's a rigorous procedure, our risks are controlled.
With the implementation of the procedure as well, yes. It's got to be obviously brief as possible, understandable, rolled out correctly, checked against, and not just not just given to people to try and implement, but there's a more rigorous process behind that.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
I've got a comment on that point. To me, it seems that within health, like what is the desired outcome? Like how exactly do you define health? Whereas in construction, you have a design, you have something to deliver upon. The building must meet that design. And so to say, okay, well, we're opening up to the creative process, no, the creative process has been done, now deliver on that design. And so it's a lot more of a defined deliverable. Whereas in healthcare, it's like, is health being symptom free? Is health being happy? Is health, waking up feeling good every morning? So I think there's a difference in that sense.
It's easy for both to slip though, isn't it? Because you could go to an A&E department and for them success could be we've got somebody through in 2 or 3 hours, but whether that person actually feels better at the end of that is another matter. Or on a building project, it could be, oh, well, we've made our profit. Is the building really as good as it could be? Maybe not, so.
I think there's a common thing there though, and it comes back to that sort of patient-centered thing, that the patient's outcome, that the patient will have a view on what is a good outcome for them. A patient might be very happy if they're 100% fit but only got one leg, as opposed to having 2 legs but being in permanent pain. That could be a beneficial outcome, and the only way one might discover that is by a good communication with that patient. And I think the industry can learn, our industry can learn from that as well, because if we have good relationships with our clients, we can understand what their drivers are, and we can focus our efforts on the things that turn them on and off. And I think if you look at framework type relationships between construction companies and clients, where there is a close relationship and the client may be imposing sort of key performance indicator measurements, it's better understood by the builder what the client's sensitivities are, what they really care about, and what actually they're not too bothered about. And that allows us to focus our attention in a better way. Whereas if we're in a market where it's bid for work, bid for work, win work, deliver it, move on, that close relationship isn't there. And we can get to the end and find everyone's surprised that the client doesn't like what we've done, and it's all going wrong.
Interesting. Yeah. Steve, I can see you're there. What are your thoughts?
I think it's interesting. I think that the person-centered care is the sort of traditional approach to construction, where the site manager dictates to the supply chain what they'll do and when they'll do it. I think the outward growing is the more collaborative approach, where you work with the supply chain and find the best approach to program, method, and the other thing with people and process, I think it's fine leaving it to the people when it goes wrong, but when it goes well. It's when it goes wrong you need to pick through the process to find out what they didn't do in the process that made it go wrong. And I think it's going to circle us back to competence. And if everyone was 100% competent, you wouldn't need the process. But I think, and we mentioned competence quite a lot, and I think off the back of Grenfell and the Building Safety Bill, the whole industry is going to have a light shone on its competence, and I think it's going to be really interesting. And on that, I shut up.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. And nice to bring it back to the very real issue that the industry is definitely it's charging at us.
Yeah, well, sorry, the one thing I put in the chat was when we were talking about people inspecting and loads of sheets saying that they've inspected, genuinely, do they know what good looks like? Do they know what good looks like when they inspect it? And I think that's part of the problem. I don't think people go out there and say it's compliant knowing that it's not compliant. I think they just don't know. I'm too controversial. I won't say another thing now.
Thank you. Great. I'll let you off the hook. And Arwin, you mentioned about in response to that, do we shrink or do we let people grow? You said that you recognise that it's mostly shrinking in terms of...
I think so, but it comes back to the pressures that a lot of other people have mentioned there about, quite often, yes, we have this utopia world where the supply chain is completely collaborative and open, and then how many times does that actually happen in reality right now? Or how many times does the pressure of you know, short delivery times, or, you know, we're all feeling the impacts of the delays in the supply chain, even of raw materials and everything else like that. And just how much of those other commercial pressures are squeezing out, as much as we all know and recognize, and everybody's on this call for the same reason. You know, we all understand the principle of getting it right first time means that there is more profit in the job. However, we also know that in reality, the day-to-day pressures that people feel to you know, to hit that sort of, well, it's, you know, the plan says it must be done today, it must be done today, just find a way, just do it. And that's where I find that you tend to, people under stress tend to become more directive and more controlling in that sense, but not necessarily considering the implication of quality and safety. Just from what I've experienced, and I do appreciate I'm relatively new into the industry, but from what I've experienced already, that's my perception. And even bringing it in from other industries that I have worked in, you know, I have worked in aerospace, I have worked in rail and things like that, and I have seen in those other industries as well that yes, we all know that there's this utopia, but we also have to deal with the very reality of how do we get that message through when people are feeling the commercial pressures to just get it done.
Yeah. Okay. So we need to be realistic that we can't all stop for 6 months and have a chat about it. We actually need to get on with doing the job.
It's finding the efficiencies to do that, because there must be ways, and certainly as technology and collaborative tools, and you know, and if nothing else, the pandemic has taught us that we have these options. But again, it's that education piece, it's that culture of turning to those collaborative tools rather than just instructing the subby just to get it done and I don't care, you do it and just sign it off, you know, that kind of mentality. And again, that comes back to the culture change, which is, you know, the leadership have got to demonstrate that day on day and stick to their guns with it. But it's hard.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to share the slides one more time, just to show something that is a hot topic in healthcare. And this is what we call activation levels. So this is looking at patients. And you can look at patients and consider them to have different activation levels. So if we look at level 1, that might be a patient who is completely overwhelmed and disengaged. So that's a patient for whom taking control of their own medication, their own exercise, their own diet, it's just too much for them. Then you might have level 2, someone who is starting to become aware of what they need to do, but is still struggling. Level 3 is someone who's taking action, achieving many behaviours and at guideline levels. And then level 4 might be someone who's maintaining behaviours and pushing further. So this is someone who really understands their own health, has taken ownership of it completely, and is, you know, they're pushing the medical professionals going, well, I get that, but what about this? What about this? So in healthcare, they recognise that you have patients who are at different levels. And one analogy that I think is useful for explaining this is to imagine that you're organising a bike ride. And you could think of different people. There might be some people, and you say, we're going on a bike ride, here's the route, you send them the route, and you know they'll just turn up with all their bike kit and they'll come and join you on a bike ride because they're experts at riding their bikes. Someone else, so that would be level 4. Level 3 might be someone who isn't really confident going on their own, but they're happy to join in the group. So you might say, I'll tell you what, I'll come and pick you up at your house and we'll chuck your bike in my car and we'll go for a bike ride. So that might be level 3. Level 2 might be someone who's a bit nervous. You've got to take the bike to them, but they're willing to give it a go. And so you might pick them up, take them, give them the bike, help them start, and then ride around with them. And level 1 might be someone who's so terrified that actually just coming and going for a walk with other people who are riding a bike is enough. So we can see that there are these different activation levels, and these are really relevant for healthcare. Now, what's interesting is that when they've looked at these activation levels, and these are just different criteria, so checking blood glucose, keeping a journal of blood glucose, doing exercise, eating healthily, what they've done is they've tracked the gain. So I think the percentage is basically just, you know, doing well. So, you know, high percentage is good. And what is interesting is seeing the difference as you go between these activation levels. And actually, what's recognizable is that getting someone from a level 3 to a level 4 doesn't provide that much gain. But the biggest gain is often getting someone from level 1 to level 2. That's where you start to get these really big jumps. Now, I just wonder if there's something in these activation levels that might be useful as a way for us to think about the people who work in our industry. So I'll just throw that back as our final sort of 1 minute of chat. Does anyone recognise that idea of activation levels, and how do you think that may or may not apply in our industry? In particular, thinking about the different people we have working on our sites. You know, any thoughts there?
I think I think that's true. I think that, you know, taking the leap from level 1 to level 2, yes, you can see that in the data, and I do think that directly applies. Something that Padraig has said there about, in terms of what good looks like, the skills shortage. So if we have a high churn of say day labourers, that if we haven't got the visual tools in place to say this is what good looks like, or if we haven't got that very rapid, easy to digest training and competency in place that could take them from the level 1 to the level 2 very quickly, in line with the churn that we're seeing, and make it an appropriate level, an appropriate language, and all that kind of stuff. That's you know, that's what we would see the biggest gain on, I think. But it's how to break that down sort of task by task, or to appropriate levels, is quite challenging.
Interesting. Yeah. And so I suppose part of that is identifying, do we spot when people are overwhelmed or disengaged, and do we prioritize that first step, getting those people who are overwhelmed or disengaged and making them more aware? Cool. Anyone else, any thoughts on that before we wrap up? Anything
Could I,
that you recognize?
yeah, I don't know whether people on the call are familiar with the Dupont-Bradley Curve, which is something that health and safety guys use a lot to assess the maturity of people on site. And they've got a very similar four stages, whether people are reactive, dependent, independent, or interdependent. And I'd encourage anyone to go and have a look at the Dupont-Bradley curve, and it's supposedly injury rates. But if you substitute defects or errors for that, and then plot where you are on the curve and see how you can move from left to right, I think that's a very good match to what you've just shown there in the medical world.
Really interesting. Thanks for that, Steve. Maybe I can encourage you to put a link in the chat box.
I tried to copy it into the chat box, but it wouldn't let me paste it. So,
all right. Oh, maybe someone else with slightly higher IT skills.
Hey, don't. I'll put the link in. I think I was trying to put the graphic in. So.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Brilliant. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I think we're already a minute over. Sorry about that. So what I will do, I will hand back to Richard. Thank you ever so much for all of your contributions. I've found that really, really interesting. I hope you've got something from it as well. And I'll hand back to Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I think we should thank you. I'm not sure we could see the seamless, link between you and Ollie if he'd shown. So, I don't know how long he spent with the slides, but that was a sterling job to get the discussion out. I don't think we missed anything by him not being able to join us. So that was great. There's a lot in that discussion that resonated with me. Getting my feet at the table for GIRI. I really like that there is, some significant analogies for me. I think the big piece was at the start of the discussion about how we possibly don't learn lessons. When I was part of the team that developed the leadership training that Nick referred to. We did a lot around black box thinking and trying to, get that sort of thinking into understanding where we've made mistakes before and correcting it. And I'm an absolute believer that we don't do that successfully well. Yet, you know, in the medical profession now have complete, you know, reviews when things go wrong and make those corrections. So I think there's a bit of a lesson there. I really like the bit around that flexibility and freedom versus rigid process. I think, you know, for me, there's an analogy there where, you know, doctors will go through their checklists and their decision trees to look at a patient, you know, when they're assessing a patient to get to a diagnosis. But what they also do is look at the patient. They're very, you know, there's a lot of emotional quotient that goes with that. And I think that we talked a lot here. Do we actually know what good looks like? You know, before we tick the box and say it's okay, do we really know what's behind it? And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot more coming down the track for us with the Building Safety Bill and the requirement to, you know, provide the golden thread. None of us have really worked out how we're going to do that, and the onus is going to come on us to provide it. So we'll try and gather that material from what we've done today. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.